Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Hi, I'm Beth Parker, and I want to thank you for joining us on Ethical Perspectives on the News. I was out driving on the southwest side of town a few days ago, and I noticed a lone deer in a cornfield, and I thought how vulnerable that deer feels or seems. I was also reminded of a song by the famous South African choir Ladysmith Black Mombasa. They released a song entitled Homeless, and in the chorus, they sing, "Many dead tonight, it could be you." And in these uncertain times, that seems very real. It could be you or it could be me. And no matter where we stand on the scale, on the perspective of, on one hand, possibly being homeless or having been homeless or trying to avoid homelessness, and the other end of the spectrum to wanting to know more about homelessness and perhaps having resources that we could contribute to the eradication of homelessness, we need to learn more. So I'm going to ask our panelists to share some information with us. Wes, would you like to start out and tell us a little about yourself and how this connects to homelessness?
Yeah, so my name is Wes Shirley. I am a street outreach case manager with Willis, Dady. I'm also the service navigator at the downtown public library. And so my job is just to try to really connect people who are experiencing homelessness with resources to try to make sure that their basic needs are met, but also to sort of help them guide themselves out of homelessness when possible.
Janae, you're up.
Yeah, I'm Janae Peterman. I'm the Director of Housing Services at Waypoint. And essentially what we do at Waypoint, our main role is a service navigator. So any household experiencing a housing crisis would contact Waypoint and we'll assess what their needs are. And then we try to put them on the path to get connected to the appropriate resource or intervention to resolve their housing crisis as quickly as possible. Sometimes that's financial assistance and programs that offer that. And sometimes that's just conversations on how they can self-resolve.
So as we get started here, just for context, how do you two interact? I mean, do you work with each other closely or in a referral process or?
Yeah, we work with Waypoint, or I'm sorry, we work with Willis Dady all the time. We probably refer to them several times a day. Basically anybody who's sleeping unsheltered in the community or is calling in for shelter and we're not able to place in shelter, we are immediately connecting to Wes and his team over at Willis Dady. And then our services align really well with Willis Dady. So we make sure that we're constantly making those referrals and partnerships.
Yeah, Wes, did you go ahead?
No, yeah, I would, I'm in several meetings a week with members from Waypoint. And that I work closely with their housing team. So oftentimes when they are looking for folks that they might be working with as far as housing, they'll reach out to the street outreach team to see if we have had contact with them, how to get a hold of them. And so I work closely with their housing case managers and Janae directly as well.
So in a very real sense, it is a community project. I mean, that's really interesting. Wes, you were the guide and the program coordinator. So let's just follow your outline. Where would you like to start? Perceived and actual causes of homelessness. Can you start there?
Sure. So I think one of the things that we deal with is a stereotype of homelessness. And a lot of that stereotype is that people who are drug addicted or very, very mentally ill. And I mean, there is some truth that people experiencing homelessness do, in fact, experience substance abuse or addiction and mental illness at higher rates than the general population. But that is not the whole story of homelessness, and I think that's an important thing to point out. That people become homeless for all kinds of reasons. Breakups, divorces, loss of jobs, medical events. That there's any number of ways that people find themselves in homelessness, and I think it's important to battle back against that idea that, well, just homeless people are either they're lazy or they just spend all their money on drugs and alcohol, or they're mentally ill, because that is not the case for everybody.
I read a statistic that the source was policy advice that said approximately 17 people per 10,000 experience homelessness each day. And I think they were referring to the United States. Does that sound possible or realistic?
Probably.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
That's a hard number to wrap my brain around.
Yeah, it is. It is. There were some other things that I found kind of interesting. Homeless people have a life expectancy of 50 years, which may or may not be true, but certainly the rigors of life in that homeless capacity would make a reasonable assessment. Janae, did you have anything that you wanted to add about perceived versus actual causes of homelessness? Or
Yeah, Wes talked a little bit about how, there's this perception that everybody experiencing homelessness is also struggling with addiction and substance or mental health and things like that. And while that is, like Wes said, there is absolutely a population that struggles with that. When we look largely at the population, the majority of people who are struggling with mental health are housed. The majority of people who struggle with substance abuse are housed. So it's not to say that everybody experiencing homelessness is homeless because they are using substances or because they have untreated mental health, because the majority of the population who do struggle with those things are successfully housed and are keeping themselves housed. So really, that has no play when it comes into why people are experiencing homelessness.
And your next point was about trauma. Yeah,
I was in a training one time, and the guy running the training, and this was trauma-informed care, which a lot of agencies that work with homelessness are now using this idea of trauma-informed care. How do you work with people who have experienced severe trauma at some point in their lives? And he said, if you look at the statistic, about 90% of the persistently homeless or chronically homeless experience severe childhood trauma. And then he said, I've never met the other 10%. And so one thing that we do see is that people, especially people who are chronically homeless, so people who are homeless for long periods of time or experience multiple sort of times of homelessness, with maybe being housed in between, that we really see that trauma plays a big role in sort of how they interact with the world, how they go through the world. And that, we as social workers are trying to be very aware of how trauma kind of rewires the brain, and how to work best with people who have experienced severe trauma.
In working with homeless people, is there a comprehensive approach so that you are directly impacting those incidents of mental illness?
Can you rephrase that question?
Well, I was just listening to the conversation about, for me, it was kind of like the chicken and the egg, which comes first, homelessness and a trauma or mental illness, or certainly homelessness causes further trauma and mental illness. And so I think I was trying to understand that connection and whether or not they're correlated or.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Wes hit it on the head. We hear horrific stories of experiences people have had, and it goes back to their childhood. And while it also plays into that idea that those that are experiencing homelessness are using substances, right, and struggling with mental health. And in almost every one of those cases, it's because they have undiagnosed. It's because they have unaddressed trauma, unresolved trauma from their childhood. And so they are using as a coping mechanism, because they don't have the supports to be able to resolve that trauma and move forward. And so that's why we see substances being used at a higher rate. And that's why we see individuals with that high level of trauma and the way that they interact with the world and the way that they interact with the others around them enter into homelessness. And then once they're in homelessness, the cycle of trauma perpetuates, right? They continue to be traumatized by the system, by others around them. In a shelter environment, we say that all the time, is shelter is re-triggering to individuals with trauma, and we need to help people understand that in the larger community, that's not a solution. And so, yes, I think we work really well of trying to connect people to mental health supports, but that's a long time coming. That can be a lot of work and a lot of trust and rapport building that it takes. We can't meet somebody day one and by day 3 we have them set up with mental health supports, because it's just the way that they interact in the world and the way that they trust one another.
So between your two programs, were you going to say something, Wes?
Yeah, and so kind of on this point of being homeless is own form of trauma. And that really what we see and what we deal with, people who are, so one of the things about experiencing homelessness is that every day is just trying to survive. So trying to find enough food, trying to figure out where you're going to sleep that night. You had your stuff stolen, so now you have to go find, or sleeping bags or more clothes. You have to get a phone because phones get stolen or because they get damaged by the weather. And so I think one of the most common responses to people experiencing homelessness is just, why don't you just go get a job? And what we see when we deal with people experiencing homelessness, and especially long-term homelessness, is that the trauma of being homeless, the sort of day-to-day survival of just trying to make it through another day and another day, really prevents a lot of ability to think about the future. So then how do you move out of homelessness? And that sort of, like Janae was saying about like sort of being re-traumatized, is that once you're in that situation, it becomes very, very difficult to get out of that situation. The way the system is set up makes it very, very difficult to exit homelessness, especially if you've been homeless for relatively long term. And then that trauma just sort of continues to build and build and build over time.
So, excuse me if I'm using the wrong term, but a caseload or your clients, how long on average do you work with a client? Is there a limit? Like your program will find housing for clients for 3 weeks, or?
Well, at Waypoint, I guess I can talk about our rapid rehousing, which serves those experiencing homelessness with case management and financial support. That program can go up to 9 months, but we can keep them enrolled in the program for 2 years after they receive their 9 months of financial assistance. So it's case by case. Average is 6 months. Typically by 6 months, they've at least identified income, and they're able to sustain that unit on their own at that point in time. The other thing too is there's a lot of people experiencing homelessness, right? So we can't keep our caseloads full of individuals who are stable. So it's kind of like Wes was talking about, that system approach of like, once somebody's stable, we've got to close them out and move on to the next person. And so it kind of keeps us in a revolving door. And sometimes that's not the best services for individuals who do need that long-term support. But that 9 month mark is pretty typical for other rapid rehousing programs in the community.
So are these people native to Cedar Rapids, or are these people coming and going from different geographical locations? Is there any system to that?
I would say overwhelmingly the people that we work with are born and raised in Cedar Rapids, or maybe just the town surrounding Cedar Rapids. And again, I think there's not just one type of homelessness. And so, there are people who become homeless and get out of homelessness in just a matter of weeks, that they just kind of need just a little bridge that, they're employed, but they lost their housing for whatever reason. And that they just need a little bit of help to get out of that situation. So we have everything from that to people who have experienced homelessness for years. And so, there isn't just kind of one story about getting out of homelessness. And I think that sort of goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, that
lots of lots of nuance. I see that one of your points is increases in homelessness nationally and locally.
Mhm.
What is the trend? What are the trends?
Yeah, homelessness has increased quite a bit. Here locally, we conduct an annual point in time count. So providers like Willis, Dady, and Waypoint, we go out twice a year, same time every year, to count how many individuals are found sleeping unsheltered within the community. And it has gone up. I think our last winter count was 76, or I'm sorry, our last summer count was 76, and then this summer count of 2022, I have to remember what year we're in, was at 107. So it's drastically increasing. And Wes can talk more about who's sleeping out on the streets and what they're seeing.
Yeah. So we kind of try to keep track, of just the numbers of people that we're serving, the people that we know are sleeping on the streets, most of the time or part of the time. And, and the last time I looked, I think we had about 155 people on our list. And that is definitely not accounting for everybody. That's just the people that we're aware of, the people that we've communicated with. And we're also getting referrals every day. So we get a number of referrals every day of people who are calling in, who are experiencing homelessness, who are sleeping in their cars or sleeping in a tent, maybe couch surfing part of the time, sleeping outside part of the time. And so I've only been doing this for a couple of years. Janae's kind of the veteran at this. But just in the two and a half years that I've been doing this, just the number of people that we're communicating with who are unsheltered has just increased dramatically.
Janae, did you have something to add? Is it, or I can ask, is that pandemic related, or is it economic related, or what's causing this sudden increase, or are we just more aware? Is it just more visible?
I think it's a little bit of everything. There's no research behind my opinion, but what I feel is we consistently are running into, we do not have the housing interventions that are needed to support some of these individuals. And so some of the individuals that we have served in the past with the current interventions we have are no longer working. And so we are continuing to see people enter into homelessness that we are unable to resolve homelessness for them. Because we don't have the correct interventions in the community, or what we do have, it's not enough to meet the needs of those that are needing that type of intervention. So I think, yes, it's pandemic and derecho a little bit, but the pandemic really affected people's mental health and their ability to get back to work, their ability to resolve and sustain financially. But then also, like I said, we just continue to have a system that's not working for those who are most in need, and the most vulnerable populations. And that's where we need to start focusing our efforts, because that's a population that's being missed and is continuing to grow.
So I'm going to dig down a little bit about that. Let's talk about what one of your talking points, Wes, was solutions. And I don't know if we're ready to go there yet, but certainly what kind of interventions would be appropriate? What kind of support do you need? What kind of things can be done?
We need permanent supportive housing for these individuals. That's not communal living. We need units that we can place people in, that we don't have to worry about rent for these individuals, while we really dig in and do the work that needs to be done with them, teaching them basic living skills, getting them connected to healthcare providers, mental health providers, substance abuse providers. All of these things take time, and it cannot be done in a 6 to 9 month program. So we also need enough case managers to be able to do this work too, where they can really dedicate the hours that are needed per week for these households. That's the solution, I think, to ending this level of homelessness. But like Wes said, there's a spectrum of homelessness. So in general, we need housing solutions.
It sounds so complicated. Is this a private enterprise, a public enterprise, a co-op? Where does that come from? Where would you like it to come from, or what is realistic? Do we talk to legislators? Do we talk to city council members? What are some tangible interventions that you would like to see put in place?
Yeah, one of the cool things is there's the Alliance for Equitable Housing. So that is an alliance created with service providers, government officials, city and county leaders, developers, funders. All of these agencies are now coming together to talk about housing and what is needed in the community and where can they start placing their dollars, right, to make a difference. So that's really exciting. And we do need to stay focused on that group there. But the other thing is Waypoint's really been working hard with the city to start dedicating vouchers to households. So voucher programs can be a program that can get that up and going quickly. But then we also need the landlords to come in and be willing to let their units or to be willing to rent to somebody that is experiencing homelessness with their units and receive a voucher for that. So.
And what is your experience with local landlords? Are they generally cooperative? Are they interested in looking into these interventions?
Yeah, I think it's hit or miss. We have some really, really great partnerships with landlords. And some landlords, it's a difficult business to be in, right? Your business model is 100% reliant on the people that you place in your units and your tenants and how well they care for the unit. So, it's hit or miss. We have really great relationships with landlords, and some landlords are still a little tentative and not ready to rent to somebody in homelessness. But we're working on building those relationships and trying to show that it can be successful.
Your housing, yeah.
So when we talk about the solution to homelessness, it is just, the simple answer is housing. Provide housing for people. People will not be homeless. And of course, it's not as simple as that. But one of the things that we've really seen over the last probably, maybe 10 years, 5 to 10 years, is that there was a lot of concern about homelessness amongst veterans. And so we've just seen this really big influx of financial resources to try to mitigate veterans' homelessness. And what we've really seen across the country is a sharp decrease in that time of homeless veterans. So, in some way, we already know what the answer is. It's just a matter of dedicating resources. But the harder part is kind of the political and the economic and financial questions of actually dedicating resources to people who are often seen as unworthy in society and not worthy of our concern, and especially worthy of our tax dollars or donation dollars.
So Wes, is that what you're referring to when you talk about a housing first model in your outline? You mentioned housing first model.
Yeah, you want to take that one, Janae?
Yeah, so Wes is spot on, right? Housing ends homelessness. We see that all the time. And so essentially what housing first is that if you start working with somebody experiencing homelessness, your number one focus is housing, right? You're not focusing on, do they need to go to treatment? Do they need to get on mental health supports? Do they need to get a job, right? Those are not focuses. Instead, you're addressing the immediate crisis, which is ending their homelessness and getting them housed. And then once they are stabilized, all other things you can start to work on, right? But it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Until your basic needs of food and shelter are met, you cannot work on anything else. And I just want to jump back really quick to something that Wes said of, housing ends homelessness. Sometimes as a community, when we talk about homelessness increasing, we have this knee-jerk reaction of we need to open more shelters. When we talk about we don't have the resources and it takes a lot of money to create new housing and get creative with how we do our housing interventions, the truth is to operate an emergency shelter is extremely expensive. A lot of resources go to operate an emergency shelter. That is not a solution to ending homelessness. So as a community, that's something that we're moving towards, is making sure that we aren't spending a lot of time and energy on emergency shelter programs and continuing to place our resources there. And we are starting to shift away from that model and really focus any additional resources or new funders coming into the community. We're trying to make sure that they're focusing on the housing solutions and not pushing that money towards shelter.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you, I was intrigued by earlier when you were talking about identifying people who are homeless within the public arena. There would have to be some kind of a trust level. I mean, you can't just go to someone and say, are you homeless? How do you find these people? I mean, I would have trouble saying, okay, Wes, Janae, yeah, I need your help. Can you talk a little bit about that or a particular instance, a successful instance of having helped someone who has been homeless? Either one of those as we kind of come to a close here. We have a few minutes, but please just go ahead and share your thoughts about.
Yeah. So as a street outreach case manager, this is kind of what I do. I go out and I try to meet people where they are. So in social work, we say meet people where they are, and that's sort of physically and emotionally and socially. But for the street outreach team, this is literally what we do is we just go out into the community. We have a pretty good idea of a lot of people experiencing homelessness, where they sleep at night, where they kind of hang out during the day. And a lot of it is just literally walking up and sort of recognizing. And I will walk up and say, like my job, my name's Wes. I'm a street outreach case manager with Willis, Dady. My job is to work with people experiencing homelessness. I don't want to make any assumptions, but if that is you, are there resources that we can talk about that you might need right now? So a lot of it is just doing kind of what you said, Beth, which is just going out and introducing yourself and finding out where people are and what they need. And then as far as successes, I would say there was a story that came out recently. So about a year and a half ago, there was a guy sleeping in a tent on the south side of town, south of Highway 30, just off of, I believe, Edgewood Road. And I drove by and I saw that tent, and I left my card on that tent. And he ended up calling me, and then we ended up working together for about the next several months. And then he disappeared, and I never really kind of knew what happened to him. And KCRG, I think, just did a story on him, and he's housed in Dubuque, and he's looking for work. And he had called me and sent an email saying, hey, I'm in Dubuque, I'm doing good. And in the story, he named me and Shannon, who was our veterans case manager, because he was a veteran as well, and just said, these two people reached out to me and they got me connected to resources and to housing, and now has been stably housed for several months, and it seems like he's really moving forward.
So things are working. Janae, we have a few minutes left. Share your final thoughts. How can people do more if they're interested? What guidelines do you have if people see this as a problem and are willing to put some energy in resolution of the problem?
Yeah, I think the number one thing you can do is just connect with your local homeless service provider. So Waypoint and Willis Dady are great ones to connect with. To just educate yourself. I feel like that's number one, right? We need to be able to educate what is homelessness and what are the solutions to homelessness, and then find out how you can get involved. Whether that's donating your time or donating your dollars for restricted funds so that we have the flexibility to pay deposits and bus tickets and things like that. All of that is very helpful. And if you're a landlord and you have units, contact us because we have tenants to place in them.
Oh, that sounds great. Wes, I have heard wonderful things about your work. Janae, I don't know you as well, but hopefully we have given people some idea about how to move forward. And thank you for being a participant in this episode of Ethical Perspectives.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Beth.